Hey, it's Jeff Hyman, and I'm here with an old friend, Amy Frink. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Jeff.
It's
How are
great to
you?
see you. How are
Yeah, you.
things?
Oh, good.
So, Amy, you've got a very specific expertise that we're going to talk about for the next 15 minutes or so, and that is recruiting finance individuals and executives into companies. And the reason I really want to focus on that is I get asked this question all the time. I'm not a CFO, but I'm hiring my first CFO, or we're building out our finance organization. And then all the ensuing questions that come from that. So before we get into all that, let me briefly introduce you. I know, Amy, you started Victory Search Group, which is a boutique retained search firm that does work across a lot of areas, but at least half your work is just in finance, so it's very specific. And you started it, about 12 years ago?
Yeah, 2002. So a little bit longer, but yeah, right in there.
Got it. And I know you were at Heidrick Struggles for quite a while before that. So you've gone from kind of one of the big premier search firms to now your own search firm. And so I'm very eager to get into it with you. So we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So why don't we start with, you've done, I'm guessing, dozens, hundreds of searches in finance. What are some of the specific things that we need to think about broadly when it comes to recruiting financial executives into our companies?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions center around where the company is in its evolution, what stage it's in. It's also important to reflect on the goals for the next 3 to 5 years. Is it an IPO? Is it growing? Will there be M&A? Will there be divestitures? You can potentially hire an externally facing CFO if there's a need to raise capital. Sometimes the bigger challenge in the short term is shoring up the internal infrastructure, and maybe you have to implement systems and those sorts of things.
So it sounds like a CFO is not a CFO is not a CFO.
Exactly.
We need to think about the stage and the issues that we're going to deal with over the next few years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is that even more important in your experience than industry experience? In some other functions, when I'm recruiting my head of sales or my head of marketing, I might look to industry experience. Is CFOs and finance people more fungible across industries, and it's more of these specific what's going to happen over the next few years that are more important?
I think in general, there are certainly examples of industries that are potentially more specific. And if it's a large enough industry, then it absolutely makes sense to start there.
Sure.
To say, if we can find the right candidate that has the right skill set for where we're headed in the next 3 to 5 years, and they happen to come from our industry, all the better. If for some reason it's some very specialized or small industry or something, absolutely those skill sets are transferable, and I think it also matters when if you are moving forward to raise capital and you're looking externally, you can have more credibility if your CFO comes from the space and understands the space and can tell that story. But certainly, I think being flexible from an industry perspective,
because the numbers are the numbers, right? I mean, it's like you've got the control experience and the audit experience, et cetera. You mentioned something interesting in there. You said something about an outside-facing CFO. That's a term I think that we hear a lot as CEOs. Can you put some color on exactly what that means and what's an inside-facing CFO by contrast?
Right. I think if an organization is looking toward an IPO or to raise capital externally, to have a CFO that has that skill set or that experience, Wall Street experience we hear, sometimes in those relationships with the funding sources externally, that is a certain skill set, if you will, in a case that you may be hiring a CFO with that skill set, then you might have a different skill set on their team in terms of making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed in terms of reporting compliance and building the processes and technology that are necessary for accounting for the number.
Got it. When we go out to look at candidates, let's say it's for a CFO role or even a controller role, et cetera, should we be focused on candidates that are currently in that same role at another company, and they're kind of taking a lateral? So if I'm looking for my CFO, should I look for another CFO? Or do I look one level down for a potential rock star and kind of bring them up, call them up to the major leagues, if you will? Someone for whom this would be a big jump in responsibility and compensation, and they'd be excited. Obviously, it might entail more risk. Yeah. How do you kind of think about that choice?
Yeah, I think a big jump in responsibility is always something that you have to look at very carefully. Certainly, there are those leaders that have been cultivating their careers very carefully and truly are ready for that next level step. It really depends on the challenges within the business, whether it's going to make sense to go that direction, if you will.
Right.
I think it's also about hitting people at the right time. So if it's it's lower odds to recruit a private equity backed CFO out of an organization when they're in the middle of something. They're transforming the company. Sure. They've gone there specifically to do something that's going to take 3 to 5 years. They want to see that through. You have a lot better chance of attracting someone who has that experience and would be making a lateral move to do it again and take another turn if they've finished with what they're doing.
So that's interesting, because I find in my experience, and maybe this is not what you've seen, in some other functions, head of marketing, head of sales, people will make moves more fluidly in the middle of events or things as you're describing them. Right. Are you saying that finance people tend to see things through in a longer time frame, an IPO or a fundraising event, and they're less likely to be recruitable during that phase?
I think so, unless and we will see rumblings of this potentially in the market, if it looks like a company maybe isn't going to achieve, for whatever reason, what they set out to achieve. So that may prompt the CFO to become available. If, boy, I came here to take it public, now we've taken the IPO off the table, or we've kicked the can down the road another 5-6 years, and I really want to get that IPO experience, then we know, hey, we might have a shot at bringing them here because our IPO is more imminent. So it may not always be a clean finish, if you will, but they've seen the strategy through, and so that may be the same with your marketing and sales and other functions as well.
Right.
I think if they go there to sort of go for the brass ring, if you will, and they think they're on pace to do that, then they're just not as open to other opportunities. So
once we have some candidates to talk to, and we're actually interviewing finance candidates, unlike some other functional areas like sales, where I can look at their sales numbers and their W-2s, or marketing, I can look at the brochures they've produced or the campaigns they've achieved. What do I ask in interviews to assess if a finance candidate knows their stuff? Because it just seems like it would be difficult to discuss in an interview. What are some questions that you've learned are predictive of success versus questions that you think are a waste of time?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's definitely moving through their background to understand the challenges that they have had over the course of their career and what the result was. That's sort of a basic to cover. We find a lot when you really get into the nitty-gritty of their technical capabilities. A lot of our clients will bring in their audit partners to weigh in, or in the private equity world, they typically have, the audit chair of the board that has a financial background when they really have to get to, their real technical acumen. We're seeing a lot more that CFOs are more operationally focused as well, and may have other responsibilities in a company that's transforming beyond running the financial function, if you will. And in that case, I think they have a better chance of recruiting a stronger head of finance and a stronger controller, because it really gives them the opportunity to spread their wings and run those functions. The CFO absolutely has oversight for it.
Right.
But they're really the right hand to the CEO, really helping to drive the strategy of the business. In a lot of cases, they're owning a part of the operations. We've seen that more in the last year or so.
As part of the interview process, have you ever seen cases where I might give our financials to the candidate and have them review them and interpret them or do an analysis just to kind of see how they think, almost as a dry run or a test drive?
Yeah, a lot of times that's prompted by the candidate when they're getting
Yeah.
that close and
Yeah.
really considering taking their career to the company and the organization to sign an NDA and really see a balance sheet and
That's more their due diligence, though.
Yeah, I've seen it more prompted by the candidate, and I think that's an interesting perspective for the board or the CEO to then have a conversation after the fact. And I think that happens.
I'm just wondering if there are ways for me as the employer or the hiring manager to do something creative that might help facilitate a discussion around how they think and how they analyze numbers. I can't sit in an interview and say, so how do you analyze numbers, right? It's a hard question to answer versus making it more of a case study or something. Is there any best practice or technique that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's more after the fact of getting that close and sharing the numbers and then having a conversation about it. More that than being formal to say, here are the numbers now, feedback to us, your thoughts, and how you would handle this or handle that or what you see in the future.
Got it. Is it useful to do that early in the discussion? Because, as an early stage company, my numbers may not be all that great, maybe heading in the wrong direction in some ways. Is it better to unveil the kimono and share those early, or am I better off getting the candidate more excited, more on the hook, if you will, more sold, and then have that discussion?
Yeah, I don't see any harm in doing it earlier and hearing their reaction. So if you want to get on the same page as early in the process as you can, and if what they see scares them away, they're probably not your right candidate. So the sooner they know exactly what they're dealing with, the better. Because as a board or a CEO, you want the CFO to be really excited about the potential in the business and maybe not focus so much on, the numbers should tell a story. And so what maybe happened in the last 6 months is it's the truth. Numbers don't lie. That's really what happened. But here's our plan and here's why we think we can get from A to B. So I don't see any reason to wait. A lot of times our clients aren't comfortable with sharing numbers and all that detail early days. But
one of the things that I've read a lot about is the relationship between CEO or founder of the business, perhaps, and CFO. It seems like an interesting dynamic, right? Because they need to be joined at the hip and partners in many ways. Yet at the same time, CFO acts as a bit of a check and balance and to balance out the frequently aggressive personality or sales-oriented personality of some founders and CEOs. What have you learned and what can you share about how we should think about that, how we should interview to find that right balance, what kind of questions we should ask? How do you figure that whole thing out?
Yeah, I think there's as many variables in that, and these are people on both sides. So is figuring out the human piece of this is always the tough part. I think for a CEO that's very self-aware in terms of what their strengths are and hire and focus on hiring skill sets and attributes that complement them versus hiring in their own image is some counsel that can be helpful for CEOs to hear when they're embarking on a CFO recruitment process. Because I think that actually increases your chances of attracting a more fully loaded, if you will, CFO that has an opportunity to come in and say, I'm really going to complement the CEO versus being a duplicate of them. Some CEOs were CFOs themselves beforehand. And sometimes that can be a challenge where they say, I want to come in somewhere where I can make more of an impact. I'm bringing a different point of view and I'm not just another version of the person to whom I report. So I think it's that complementary piece on both sides, and hopefully CFO candidates have some self-awareness as well. And these are the types of things that I'm good at and that I like to do. Are these the same types of things that the CEO is good at and likes to do? And then maybe it's not the best place.
If I'm a positive, aggressive, sales-oriented founder or CEO, Am I looking for a CFO that really balances that out and is almost a bit of a downer, Debbie Downer, or a pain, right?
Let's do it.
To what extent should I look for that balance? Or do I look for someone that's more like me in optimism and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't know that a realistic CFO, again, numbers don't lie. Numbers are facts and they're stubborn things. So you can look at the real data and still be positive and optimistic. And you really want a partner in the CFO. You really don't want a traffic cop that
Right.
is always out there saying, "Oh my gosh,
We can't do this. We can't do that.
We can't do this."
Yeah.
And that's really not a highly evolved business partner oriented CFO. And great CFOs that have ascended to that level, whether they came up through the accounting ranks or the finance ranks, really should have honed their ability there to really partner with the business, partner with whether it's supply chain or marketing or sales or the different parts of the business to understand the business and find solutions
Right.
versus, oh no, we can't do that. Or, but they also have to be there to say, okay, if you're projecting this and you go and do this, this is what could happen or may happen, or I've seen happen before in a similar situation to
Right.
again be that yin to the yang
Yeah.
without, but solutions oriented versus
Versus traffic cop.
Right.
In the couple minutes we have remaining, the last thing I want to spend a few minutes on is the board or investors in this whole discussion, because it seems like more than any other hire, the board is typically very interested in the CFO or the head of finance, even if it's a controller,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
So how do you reconcile that triangle during the recruiting process, especially board or investors, CEO as the hiring manager, CFO or controller as the candidate? Who should make the final decision if there's a disagreement on the final candidate?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. What have you seen works best?
Yeah. The more of these discussions you can have up front before launching a recruitment practice, the better.
Yeah.
We'll say that. You are exactly right that investors, which are often on the board or can change the two out, absolutely. This is their window into the business. This is their connection point to the results of the business, how the business is performing, and they need to have a comfort level that they are comfortable having this person really look after their investment and report back to them and all of that. So honestly, I think if there's a disagreement, that's probably a non-starter. And if one party or the other, whether it's the leadership team or the CEO or the board, has a strong aversion to one of the candidates, that probably tells you something that it's probably not the right candidate. So I think there does need to be alignment there.
So just so I'm clear, to use layman's terms, if the CEO doesn't agree on the final candidate, then the focus should be on keep looking for until we find one that both parties agree.
Yeah, that's right. And then there's some work to do to understand why we ended up in two separate places. Where's and maybe use that as a learning to gain alignment before you go back to the market. I don't know honestly that I've seen that happen where it's so strong and boy, I could not work with this person. The CEO saying that and the board saying, well, this is our person. I mean, that would be foolish for the board or the investors to force a CFO. That's the leadership team. They're going to be shoulder to shoulder, day in and day out, working through challenges. So that may actually be a symptom of something greater that probably needs to be investigated.
Maybe a culture definition or a fit definition or something like that. I have seen cases where the board or investors feel very strongly about a candidate, a finance candidate. The CEO doesn't think that person would be a fit for the organization. And to your point, the search probably needs to go on until we find someone that both parties feel comfortable with.
Right. And use that to drive the conversation around what is it? What's the culture issue there, and maybe learn a bit more about that.
This has been incredibly insightful. How can people get in touch with you, Amy, or learn more about Victory Search Group?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you can visit our website at victorysearchgroup.com. My direct dial is 480-585-0073, or you can send me an email at amy@victorysearchgroup.com.
That's easy, huh?
Hopefully, that's right.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights around recruiting for finance. It was really helpful.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks, Amy.